The San Bernardino Mountains are filled with beautiful vacation spots, a great place away from the stresses of everyday life in our overpopulated, traffic-filled big cities. But often, in the pursuit of our mental recess, we overlook the dangers of the wild. Clarence Pike was staying with his Christian youth group in a cabin located in a secluded area of the San Bernardino Mountains. It was winter, and snow was especially plentiful this season. Clarence and some of the other boys were now getting bored of the activities planned for them by their guardians, having been there for 3 days. The mischievous boys were able to convince their counselors to allow them to hike up the large hill behind the cabin in order to sled down it, with the understanding that the boys would not venture too far into the woods. The snow in this area was very thick, and the boys knew this would allow them plenty of time to explore while the counselors thought that they were sledding. 5 of the boys, including Clarence, started up the hill, each boy holding their own sled as they pushed through the thick snow. Once they were out of sight of the cabin, they ditched the sleds and continued up the hill, in hopes of finding something at least mildly interesting. It was a largely flat, open bit of land, with a beautiful view of the frost-covered wilds below. As the boys surveyed the area, they began to worry that they would find nothing. Then, just before the others were about to give up, Clarence yelled in the distance, "You guys, over here! I found a fort or something!" Once they had all converged on Clarence, he motioned them towards what looked like some kind of shelter someone had made a very long time ago. It was constructed of long pieces of wood that were leaned against each other in the typical A-frame style, with the bottoms buried deep into the ground. The structure was quite large, with 4 of the young men being able to crawl inside. "I'm going to check ahead a little more. I'm not getting in there," said the last boy as he walked further into the woods. The structure was also very well insulated, and the boys were happy to have somewhere to warm up for a little while. As the temperature inside the shelter began to rise, the snow that was drug in by the boys slowly melted. Clarence began picking through the sticks and rocks steadily being exposed. Clarence then noticed a larger piece of wood sticking out of the newly snowless ground that had a mysteriously familiar shape. Digging into the frozen dirt with a smaller, sharp stick, Clarence was able to pry the larger piece out of the cold ground. Examining the piece up close froze Clarence to his core. Finally recognizing what he was holding in his hands, Clarence let out, "Oh no." He was holding a large bone, about the size of a human forearm. It had obvious teeth and scratch marks covering its dull white exterior, filling Clarence with alarm. He then noticed the smaller stick that he had been using as a digging tool was a piece of a rib cage. Looking all around the shelter, he saw the floor was riddled with skeletal remains. In a panic, Clarence began screaming at his friends. "Get out! Get out!" It took only a moment for the others to figure out why Clarence was in such a state of dread. Now aware of the graveyard of sorts they were sitting in, the boys scrambled to get out of the shelter. Unsure if the bones were from local wildlife or even a human, the 4 agreed that it was time to go. But the boy who walked further ahead still had not returned, and the level of fear was rising in the boys. Just as one of the boys was about to yell for their missing friend, they all heard footsteps coming towards them through the trees at a fast pace. "Run!" To their relief, the 5th of the group had come sprinting through the trees into the clearing. Their solace would be short-lived as the running boy looked up at them in terror. He howled at the top of his lungs. Flying past his friends, the boy sprinted down the hill. The remaining 4, still in shock themselves, glanced back towards the tree line to see a large black mass bursting into the clearing. It was a large, black bear, its mouth wide open and dripping with steaming saliva. The furry black behemoth was furious at the sight of the boys and was coming straight for them. Hurling itself through the snow, they could see its massive, stained teeth as it released its thunderous roar of fury. The boys took off running down the hill, back towards the cabin. Clarence, being at the back of the group, could hear the loud, angry panting of the beast getting further behind them as they got farther down the hill, the crunch of his immense claws in the compacting snow eventually diminishing to nothing. Finally reaching the cabin, the group was physically exhausted and mentally in shock. The group took some time to catch their breath and collected their thoughts before discussing what had just happened. They were just playing around in a black bear's home filled with unknown remains. Had the fifth boy not gone ahead, they may have been trapped inside the shelter when the hairy beast had returned, adding themselves to the pile of bones. Worried this could happen to someone else, the boys reluctantly relayed their story to the counselors of the group, knowing there would be punishment to come. After hearing the frightening tale, the counselors contacted local authorities in hopes of learning more about the structure, its morbid contents, and the bear. A couple days later, they were informed by the authorities that no human remains were found in the bear den. The bear itself hadn't been seen during the investigation, but the authorities, unnerved by the amount of fresh animal remains found in the den, made sure the group knew to stay far away from the location. No information on the structure, or indication of when it was built, was ever found. All that is known is that someone constructed the shelter many years ago with great skill and care. Then sometime later, a beast with no end to its hunger would make it its home, protecting its found dwelling with intense fury.